The headlights blazed brightly, blinding Lena's eyes and casting sharp, unsettling reflections on the windshield, making her squint and grip the door handle tighter. Her breathing grew more erratic, and her heart pounded as if ready to burst from her chest. She felt cold sweat trickling down her back, mingling with the tension that seemed to hang in the air. The car roared around the next turn, barely missing the shoulder. Mike, sitting beside her, was tense as a spring, struggling to maintain control of the vehicle. "Is he still behind us?" Lena blurted out, her voice a trembling whisper barely cutting through the engine noise. Mike cast a quick glance in the rearview mirror. His furrowed brow said more than any words could. The answer was clear: the car behind them was still locked on. The pursuers were not losing an inch, like predators waiting for the moment to strike. The headlights of their vehicle resembled a beast's eyes glowing in the dark, ready to pounce on its prey. "Damn," Mike muttered, sharply turning the steering wheel, and the car screeched onto a narrow, poorly lit street. It felt as if they had slipped into a black hole where there was nothing but tense anticipation. The city at night was frighteningly empty. The streets looked dead, no pedestrians, no other cars. Only the grim shadows of buildings and the occasional streetlights, whose dim lights offered no hope of salvation. All the sounds of normal city life seemed to have dissolved in this eerie silence, leaving them alone with the roar of two engines merging into a single symphony of danger and fear. Lena turned to look over her shoulder. The pursuers were right behind them, having turned into the same alley. They moved flawlessly, almost with terrifying precision, as if they knew exactly where to go. There was something predatory and focused in their actions. "What do we do?" Lena's voice trembled even more, and although she tried to keep her composure, her hands involuntarily clenched into fists. A fear was building in her chest that was hard to suppress. She looked at Mike, hoping for some kind of plan, but only saw him sinking deeper into his thoughts, like a cornered animal. I don't know," Mike replied through gritted teeth. His gaze remained fixed on the road, and his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. He was trying to stay calm, but his tense movements betrayed his fear and panic. "We need to find a place to hide, but where?" Every street, every turn seemed like an endless loop with no exit. All the buildings, lights, and the few passing cars blended into a solid flow that offered no salvation. Time seemed to stretch, turning into an endless nightmare. "This is insane," Lena whispered, feeling her heartbeat echoing in her ears. It seemed to her that they would never escape. Her legs trembled weakly, and cold sweat had already soaked through her clothes. No effort could rid her of the feeling that they were trapped. Suddenly, the sound of the pursuing car grew louder, almost deafening. Lena looked back again and saw the black shadow of the vehicle rapidly closing in, its headlights illuminating their car brighter. They were no longer just following, they were accelerating, closing the distance with each second. "They're catching up," Lena screamed, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Mike cursed under his breath, sharply turning the wheel again. The car jumped over another bump, nearly losing control. The tires screeched against the asphalt, but Mike regained control just in time, keeping the car on the road. "Hold on, Lena," he said, gripping the wheel even tighter. "We'll figure something out." A few months ago, it all started with an ordinary trip to Walmart. Lena and Mike had no idea that this night would stay with them for a long time. It was a typical July evening. The air was warm and humid, and the evening sun slowly dipped below the horizon, enveloping the city in soft pink-orange hues. Lena had just finished her shift at work, and Mike, as always, had come to pick her up. They smiled tiredly at each other, discussing their plans for the evening, but neither of them could predict that this trip to the store would mark the beginning of something much larger. "Do you really need those bags so urgently?" Mike asked with a slight smirk as he turned off the engine in the Walmart parking lot. "Yes, unless you want me to have mountains of trash piling up at home," Lena joked, slamming the car door. "Besides, we'll be quick. We'll grab what we need and head straight home." They walked toward the store's entrance, unaware that something awaited them that would forever change their ordinary lives. Inside, everything seemed normal. A few shoppers lazily pushed carts down the aisles. The flickering bright lights above the registers created an artificial sense of calm, and the cashiers monotonously scanned items as if that evening were just like any other. For Lena and Mike, the familiar silence of the store felt so routine that they didn't notice the barely perceptible tension that had begun to fill the air. We still need paper towels, Lena suddenly remembered, glancing around and spotting the household goods aisle. Mike rolled his eyes, but suppressing a frustrated sigh. He silently turned the cart in the right direction. That's why I never like going shopping with you, he said with a slight grin. We came just for trash bags, and we've already almost filled a cart with all sorts of stuff. At least now you won't have an excuse for not having anything to wipe up spilled coffee, Lena replied, absorbed in her shopping list on her phone, oblivious to his teasing. The store seemed calm, but beneath that calmness lay an almost imperceptible sense of unease that Lena felt more acutely. At first, she thought it was just fatigue from the day, but the feeling lingered. She glanced around absently, still attributing it to her imagination when she noticed the same person passing by them several times. It was as if he appeared in every aisle they went to. Do you feel anything strange? She quietly asked Mike, who was just placing a pack of paper towels into the cart. What do you mean? Mike asked, looking over his shoulder at her, slightly furrowing his brow. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Lena looked around thoughtfully, but the man was out of her sight again. But it feels like someone is watching us. Mike chuckled and placed his hand on her shoulder. You're just tired, he said. Let's grab the last few things and head home. When they entered another aisle at Walmart, Lena noticed him for the first time. The man in the dark hoodie stood nearby as if he were picking something off the shelves. At first glance, he didn't draw attention, but his presence inexplicably caused a slight unease. Lena stole a glance at him but quickly turned away, deciding he was just another shopper. However, they soon encountered him again in a different section. This time he lingered longer than necessary, slowly passing by them. Lena involuntarily tensed up as she noticed his gaze flicker in their direction. Mike, she called quietly, have you seen that guy? Mike, engrossed in selecting another box of cookies, barely glanced over. Who? He asked, looking away. That one, in the hoodie. He's been around us twice now. Mike squinted and looked at the man, but he seemed to be occupied with examining the products on the shelf and didn't appear suspicious. Mike shrugged. Oh come on, there are plenty of people here. It's probably just a coincidence, he said, returning to his shopping. Lena tried to shake off her anxiety. She didn't want to seem paranoid, but something about the man's behavior unnerved her. They moved further into the store, picking up the remaining items. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade. In each new aisle, Lena kept noticing him nearby. Sometimes he stood by the food shelves, sometimes by the household goods, but always at a safe distance, as if he were deliberately avoiding direct contact. She looked at Mike again, who was trying to stay calm, but it was clear he was becoming more cautious too. They quickened their pace, hoping to finish shopping and leave, but every time they thought they had shaken the feeling, the man reappeared on the horizon. He wasn't doing anything overtly threatening, but his constant presence became unbearable. Mike, Lena whispered again, gripping his hand tighter, he's behind us again. Now Mike looked more concerned. He shot a quick glance at the man and nodded. Okay, let's just grab what we need and get out of here. Lena and Mike tried to keep themselves composed. It's just a coincidence, Lena kept repeating to herself, trying not to glance at the stranger. Maybe he was just shopping like they were. And her unease was a result of fatigue from a long day. Mike, as usual, remained calm, but there was no longer the same ease in his movements. He began to walk faster, as if eager to leave the store. Let's grab some milk and go, he suggested, casting a quick glance at Lena. Lena nodded, but her gaze kept returning involuntarily to the man. He was somewhere nearby, moving through the aisles, sometimes disappearing from view but then reappearing on the horizon. It no longer felt like a coincidence. They approached the checkout. Lena sighed in relief, seeing the end of her ordeal. The line was short, and they quickly loaded their purchases onto the conveyor belt. The man seemed to have vanished, and for a moment, Lena felt calm. She and Mike began discussing their plans for the evening, and the tension that had been building for the last half hour gradually started to dissipate. But just as they were starting to put their purchases into bags, Lena accidentally turned around and froze. The stranger was standing at the next checkout. He wasn't buying anything, he was just standing there, seemingly watching them. His face remained hidden in the shadow of his hood, and Lena couldn't make out his expression, but his posture, his stillness, something was off. Mike, she whispered, feeling the anxiety swell up in her again. He's here again. Mike slowly turned, catching sight of him, and his face grew serious. Let's just get out of here, he said quietly, picking up the bags with their purchases. They headed for the exit, trying not to look back. The cold night air hit their faces as they stepped outside, and Lena felt a momentary sense of relief. But it was short-lived. A second later, she saw that same man exiting right behind them. He's following us again, Lena breathed, her voice trembling. Mike tightened his grip on her hand, and they quickened their pace towards their car. The Walmart parking lot was quiet, with only a few cars parked under the dim glow of the streetlights. Lena and Mike hurried towards their car, trying not to look back, but the tension between them was palpable. They were silent, each feeling their anxiety grow with every step. Lena kept glancing over her shoulder, checking to see if the man was following them. That was strange, wasn't it? Lena asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike nodded, maintaining his pace. Yeah, I don't like this situation either, he admitted. But maybe he just happened to be nearby. The store was empty, so it felt like he was following us. Mike, I saw him at the checkout. He wasn't buying anything. He was just standing there, as if he was waiting for us. Lena stopped and looked at her friend with concern. Her eyes were filled with fear. This isn't a coincidence. Mike slowed his pace, looked at Lena, and nodded. Now he understood that the situation was more serious than they wanted to believe. Okay, let's just get in the car and leave, he said quietly. If something's wrong, we'll go straight to the police. But then Lena noticed movement again. The man in the hoodie emerged from the store and headed towards a black car parked nearby. Lena froze in place as she saw him get into the passenger seat, while two other men were already sitting in the driver's seat and backseat. They looked alert as if waiting for a signal to act. Mike, Lena's voice trembled, she couldn't take her eyes off the car. There are two more. They've been watching us. Mike stood still next to her and glanced at the car. The black sedan started its engine, and the deafening roar of the motor shattered the night's silence. The men in the car were staring directly at them. Run, Mike said, his voice hoarse but full of determination. The car began to move, and the low, ominous rumble of the engine echoed across the empty parking lot. Lena felt her heart race. The black sedan smoothly pulled away, heading straight for them, moving slowly but surely. Mike grabbed Lena's hand, and they quickened their pace. Let's go faster, he whispered, trying to remain calm, but there was tension in his voice. They reached their car, throwing the shopping bags into the backseat. Lena fumbled with her seatbelt, her shaking hands causing her thoughts to jumble. Mike turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life. At that moment, the black car pulled in closer, as if the pursuers were deliberately waiting, watching their every move. Mike, they're right behind us, Lena exclaimed in a panic, glancing over her shoulder. Mike jerked the wheel, maneuvering their car out of the parking spot. The tires screeched as they sped toward the exit. But the black car accelerated, smoothly tailing them like a predator stalking its prey. Lena looked in the rearview mirror. The sedan's headlights shone brightly, blinding her and amplifying her fear. They're not falling behind, she whispered, gripping the seatbelt tightly, her heart pounding. I know, Mike replied quietly, focused on the road. His face was tense, hands gripping the wheel tightly. He was trying to stay calm, but Lena could see sweat forming on his forehead. They hit the main road, and Mike increased the speed, hoping to shake them off. But the pursuers didn't relent. The car behind them accelerated, mimicking their maneuvers as if anticipating every turn. What do they want? Lena asked desperately, her voice trembling with panic. I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Mike sharply turned onto a side street, but the headlights of the black sedan still followed them, showing no signs of stopping. The streets were nearly empty, the nighttime city asleep, and it seemed no one cared that somewhere in the silence, a chase was unfolding. Mike was frantically looking around, trying to think of where to turn. The headlights of the black sedan still shone brightly behind them, relentlessly pursuing them. Lena could barely breathe, her heart was pounding so loudly that it felt like she could hear it over the roar of the engine. They were racing through the nighttime streets. But an exit seemed further away than ever. Mike, we can't just keep driving like this, Lena exclaimed, panic increasingly overtaking her voice. I know, Mike shot back tersely, his eyes glued to the road. Then he saw a glimmer of hope. A neon sign for a 24-hour store was visible at the end of the street, slightly off to the side. Without hesitation, Mike jerked the wheel and turned into the parking lot, where only a few cars were parked. They skidded to a stop, their vehicle sliding into a space between two trucks. "Quick, let's go," Mike commanded, and Lena jumped out of the car almost immediately, not looking back. They ran toward the store's entrance, their footsteps echoing across the quiet parking lot. As they stepped inside, Lena felt the cold air from the air conditioner hit her face. The store's lights were blindingly bright compared to the dark street. Lena and Mike paused, looking around as if trying to assure themselves that they were safe. They will stop, right?" Lena gasped, her chest rising and falling heavily with anxiety. Mike glanced back through the glass doors. The black sedan slowly pulled into the parking lot but didn't stop. Instead, it continued moving, driving past the store. They froze, watching the car that seemed to have lost interest in their pursuit. "They've left," Mike exhaled in relief, but his voice still trembled with tension. Lena couldn't believe it. Inside the store, they finally felt a sense of relative safety. But the anxiety lingered. Something told her that this was not yet the end. Inside the store, they were greeted by a young guy in his 20s, wearing a name tag on his shirt that read Kevin. He was standing behind the counter, lazily scrolling through something on his phone, but immediately noticed Lena and Mike as they burst in, barely catching their breath. Their faces, tense and pale, spoke more than any words could. "Hey, are you okay?" Kevin asked, frowning and clearly sensing that something was wrong. He put his phone aside and stepped closer, his gaze carefully studying them. Lena leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breath. She felt her legs turn to jelly from the stress they had just experienced. Mike stood nearby, nervously glancing through the glass doors outside as if expecting the black sedan to return at any moment. They were following us," Lena finally breathed out, her voice trembling. She looked up at Kevin. "We were at Walmart, and there was a man who kept following us, then he got into a car. There were two others with him. They started chasing us." Kevin froze, his face turning serious. He no longer looked as relaxed as he had at first. Raising his hand, he gestured for them to come closer to the counter. "Listen, calm down," he said quietly, "tell me everything from the beginning. Where are they now?" "We saw them in the parking lot. But they didn't stop when we came in here, they just drove past." Mike replied, still nervously glancing around. Kevin nodded and reached for his phone. He clearly understood that the situation was serious. "Okay, here's the plan. I'll call the police. If someone is chasing you, it's best to report it right away," he said firmly, already dialing the number. "There are plenty of cameras here, if they come back, we'll catch them immediately." Lena felt her panic begin to ease a little. She was no longer alone in this situation, and the knowledge that Kevin was ready to help gave her some confidence. Kevin acted quickly, his movements confident and precise. As soon as he dialed the number on his phone, he began relaying the situation to the police. His voice was calm and assured, which slightly eased Lena and Mike's tension, giving them hope for swift help. "Yes, two people are claiming they are being followed and chased in a car," he spoke into the phone, glancing briefly at Lena and Mike, who seemed to be on edge. "We are at a 24-hour store on Main Street. Yes, it's a black sedan with 3 men. They just drove by, but people were frightened. Can you send a patrol?" Lena stood nearby, her eyes fixed on Kevin, feeling her panic gradually start to fade. The realization that the police would be arriving soon gave her a bit of confidence, but the fear didn't completely leave her. Mike, still on guard, stood a bit away, peering through the windows to check if the black car had returned. He knew this could be a critical moment and couldn't afford to relax. "Okay," Kevin continued, confidently answering the officer's questions, "thank you. We're still inside. They'll hide in the back room until you arrive." He ended the call and put his phone in his pocket. "The police will be here in a few minutes," he said, turning to Lena and Mike with a look of hope on his face. "But it's better if you're not seen if they happen to come back." Lena nodded, her breathing becoming more even, but anxiety still gripped her from the inside, not letting go for even a moment. She knew that as long as they were in this store, they were safe, but she couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. "This way," Kevin indicated, showing them the way to a door at the back of the store. "The back room isn't the most comfortable place, but it's safer, and I have cameras." If they show up, I'll see everything immediately. Without hesitation, Lena and Mike followed him, despite the growing tension. As they passed through the narrow corridor leading to the back room, they felt the air grow heavier, and each moment seemed to stretch into eternity. Mike locked the door behind them, and they found themselves in a small room filled with boxes and shelves of products. The quiet hum of the refrigeration equipment seemed deafening against the silence, and Lena could almost count the beats of her own heart. "We can't just sit here," Mike whispered, listening to every sound outside the door. The fear and worry in his voice were palpable. "They might come back. The police are on their way," Lena tried to reassure him, though she felt extremely uncomfortable in the cramped space. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking comfort in every familiar object surrounding them. Stacked boxes, several containers of cleaning supplies, and long shelves filled with products all seemed too real and yet distant at the same time. She tried to remember something positive that could distract them from this nightmare. At that moment, her thoughts returned to normal life, to evening walks, to the laughter they shared while simply picking out groceries at the supermarket. Now their world had been turned upside down, and everything they knew about safety seemed to have vanished. "You know," Lena said, trying to inject confidence into her voice, "even if this is just a terrible nightmare, we need to stick together and wait for all this to end. We've done everything we could." Mike nodded, his expression remaining focused, but a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. They both knew that everything would change soon, and their only salvation was faith in the police and the knowledge that they were not alone. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, the very thing Lena and Mike had feared was happening. The black sedan reappeared, slowly rolling up to the entrance of the store. The car's headlights cut through the night darkness, illuminating the empty lot and the glass doors of the store. The engine fell silent, and 3 men got out of the car. Their movements were unhurried but clearly purposeful. Kevin, standing behind the counter, immediately noticed them. One of the men, the same one who had followed Lena and Mike at Walmart, walked directly toward the store doors, his face now better illuminated by the lights. There was nothing remarkable about him, an ordinary face, not too young, with a light stubble and a calm, even emotionless expression. However, there was something threatening in his gait and gaze. The man approached the doors and reached for the handle, intending to enter, but at that moment, Kevin, keeping his composure, stepped forward and positioned himself right in front of the entrance. "The store is closed to you, buddy," he said calmly, keeping his eyes fixed on the stranger. The man paused for a moment, sizing up Kevin, clearly contemplating his next move. But his eyes remained cold, and he clearly had no intention of simply walking away. "We have business here," he said in a low voice, slowly raising his hand toward the door. "It won't take long." Kevin didn't budge, his face remaining calm, though he was prepared for any development. "The police are already on their way," Kevin said, his voice sounding even firmer. "You'd better leave before they arrive." The man froze, his gaze remaining steady for a moment. Behind him, the other 2 stayed in the car, watching the scene unfold outside. A silence filled with tension settled in, and it felt like time had stopped. But then the stranger slowly lowered his hand and took a step back. "Fine," he mumbled, throwing one last glance at Kevin. "We'll be back." The man turned and walked back to the car, saying nothing to his companions. A second later, the engine roared to life again, and the black sedan, having waited a moment, pulled out of the parking lot, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Kevin took a deep breath, watching the departing vehicle, his heart still racing. But he remained in place, keeping everything under control while he waited for the police. Lena and Mike sat in the cramped storage room, tense as they listened to every sound outside. The silence felt too thick, almost suffocating. The only noise breaking the stillness was the soft hum of the refrigerators and the occasional footsteps beyond the door. Each time Lena heard footsteps, her heart began to race. She couldn't tell if it was Kevin returning to the register or someone else, perhaps one of those who had just been at the entrance. Mike sat across from Lena, nervously tapping his fingers on his knees, his eyes fixed on the door. He tried to stay calm, but the tension was clearly getting to him. Anxiety was evident in his breath and movements. "Do you hear anything?" Lena asked quietly, feeling the fear tightening around her. Mike shook his head, then leaned closer to the door, listening intently. "Not yet," he whispered back, glancing at her. "But Kevin said the police are on their way. They should be here soon." Lena nodded, but Mike's words did little to reassure her. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Thoughts of the men possibly returning wouldn't leave her alone. She couldn't understand what they wanted, why they were following them, and what they planned to do if they hadn't escaped. Mike sat back down next to her, still straining to hear any sounds. Each footstep outside made them freeze as if the world around them had come to a halt, leaving just the two of them in this tense waiting. It was unclear which was worse, the silence or the possibility that something might happen. "Do you think they'll come back?" Lena asked quietly, struggling to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I don't know," Mike replied, though doubt lingered in his tone. "But I hope the police arrive before they can do anything." They both fell silent again, listening intently for sounds outside, hoping to hear the sirens of police cars. The anxiety and anticipation made each moment unbearably long. When the police finally arrived, their flashing lights cut through the dark parking lot with bright red and blue bursts. Lena and Mike heard the approaching sound of sirens and, as if releasing a long-held tension, finally exhaled in relief. Kevin, who had been watching the situation closely, glanced at the bewildered couple and informed them that the danger had passed. Feeling reassured, Lena and Mike cautiously exited the storage room, still feeling a slight tremor in their knees. 2 police cars stood in front of the store. Several officers were already speaking with Kevin, who remained calm as he recounted what had happened. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a furrowed yet composed expression, turned to Lena and Mike as they stepped outside. "Good evening," he said with professional calmness, approaching them. "I'm Officer Brown. I understand that you were followed and pursued. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Lena still felt anxious but composed herself and began to speak in a trembling voice. She detailed how she had noticed a suspicious man in the store, his strange behavior, and then how he seemed to start following them from aisle to aisle. Lena continued, explaining that at first, she dismissed it as a coincidence, but when he appeared at the register, she and Mike began to seriously worry. It later became clear that they had followed them to the parking lot and started pursuing them through the city. Mike added to the account, describing the moments when they tried to escape in their car but were unable to shake off their pursuers. They shared how, losing hope of getting away, they turned to the 24-hour store where they found temporary refuge. According to their story, Kevin had prevented one of the pursuers from entering, which may have saved them. Officer Brown listened attentively to every word, his expression remaining inscrutable, but there were notes of concern and understanding in his eyes. "It seems I have a good idea of who we're dealing with," he said as the account came to an end. "These men have been on our radar for a while. They're involved in a number of robberies and have been suspects in several kidnapping cases. We've been trying to catch them red-handed for months, but we haven't been able to gather enough evidence." Lena and Mike exchanged glances, shocked and worried by what they had heard. It was terrifying to realize they had accidentally come under the sights of such dangerous individuals. "But thanks to you, we've made an important step forward today," Officer Brown continued. "Now we have more information, and we hope to apprehend them soon. Fortunately, you did the right thing, didn't take any risks, but hid and called the police. That was the best decision in that situation. But why did they choose us? What did they want?" Lena couldn't hold back and asked, her voice barely audible and full of worry. Brown shook his head. "Perhaps you were a random target. These people choose their victims based on opportunity, not personal motives. They likely noticed you and decided that you were easy prey. It could have been money, valuables, or simply an attempt to intimidate. These guys are indiscriminate in their victim selection." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. Mike squeezed her hand in support. The officer noticed their anxiety and added, "You are safe. We will take steps to ensure these individuals cannot harm anyone else. Your statement has been very helpful to us, and we will keep you informed. The main thing is that you are under our protection now." Lena nodded, feeling a slight relief that the situation was under control. Although she was still scared, the understanding that the police were now aware of the criminals and were actively working to apprehend them brought a sense of calm. Several days had passed since that frightening night when Lena and Mike first felt a real threat. Although the police promised to keep them updated, they tried to avoid dwelling on what had happened, attempting to return to normal life. However, anxiety still lingered. They felt as if something could happen at any moment. Early on Friday morning, Lena received a call from Officer Brown. His calm yet businesslike tone immediately made her tense. "Lena, good morning. There's news regarding your case," he said. "Is something wrong?" Lena asked, feeling a chill inside. "Good news," Brown reassured her. "We've apprehended those men. We used footage from the Walmart cameras and other stores you passed by. We managed to track their vehicle and identify them." Lena took a deep breath, feeling a heavy weight lift off her shoulders. She couldn't believe that it was finally over. The criminals had been found. "Are they in custody now?" she asked, still unable to grasp that it was true. "Yes," Brown confirmed. "They were arrested last night while attempting to cross the city. It appears they were planning to flee, but thanks to your testimony and the camera footage, we were able to act in time. They are currently being interrogated on several charges, including stalking, attempted robbery, and involvement in other crimes." Lena felt relief wash over her. She and Mike had been saved not only from that night but also from potential consequences. She couldn't stop thanking Kevin and the police for their swift response. "Thank you, officer," Lena said quietly. "This is such a relief." "I'm glad it ended without serious consequences," Brown replied. "If you need anything else or want to know more, don't hesitate to call." After ending the conversation, Lena sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to comprehend that they were no longer in danger. After a moment, she called Mike to share the news. A few days after the call from the police, Lena and Mike finally decided to return to the very store where they had taken refuge during the night of the chase. They needed to personally thank Kevin for his composure and courage. That evening, he didn't just help them hide and call the police. His quick reaction could have literally saved their lives. Without his help, everything could have ended much worse, and Lena often thought about that with a shiver. They chose early evening, hoping to avoid the crowds. As soon as they entered, Lena felt a slight tension. The memories of that night were still too fresh. But looking around, she realized that everything appeared completely ordinary. The store shelves were in their usual places, shoppers were calmly going about their everyday purchases, and there was something soothing about it. After all, life went on, and the world had not stopped because of their ordeal. Lena quickly spotted Kevin, who was standing behind the register, just like before. He seemed unchanged, still, the same calm, focused demeanor as if nothing had happened. He was engaging warmly with customers, scanning their items with the same professional composure that had impressed Lena that night. As the line in front of them dissipated, Lena and Mike approached the register. Inside, something tightened in Lena. She felt awkward about having to thank someone who had done something truly significant for them, even though it seemed like a simple act of help. "Hi, Kevin," Lena began, forcing a smile she hadn't felt genuinely in a long time. "We wanted to thank you. If it weren't for you, we don't know how everything would have turned out that night." Kevin seemed slightly surprised by their visit, but his expression remained as calm as always. He nodded, accepting their gratitude but not making too much of it. "I'm glad you're okay," he said calmly. "I was just doing my job. It wasn't anything special." Mike stepped forward, adding that Kevin's words couldn't fully express their gratitude. "For us, it was more than just a job," he said, his voice serious. "You saved us that night. You could have just called the police and stepped aside, but you came out and stood between us and those guys. That took courage." Kevin appeared a bit flustered by the praise but smiled. His humility was evident, and despite all their words, he clearly didn't see himself as a hero. To him, it was just part of the job, and this simplicity only deepened their respect for him. "Well, you know, in moments like that, you don't think too long," Kevin replied modestly. "You just act, and you did the right thing by not confronting them yourself. It was important to hide immediately. It all turned out well, and that's what matters." Feeling both excitement and gratitude, Lena took a small gift bag out of her purse. She had thought this gesture through in advance, understanding that for them, it was a way to express something more than just words. "We wanted to give you this," Lena said, extending the bag. "It's just a token of our appreciation. You might say it's not necessary, but it's very important to us." Kevin took the bag, looked at it in surprise, and then sighed slightly. He seemed not to expect such attention. "Thank you, guys," he replied, smiling slightly embarrassed. "Really, you shouldn't have. But I'm glad everything ended well and without major issues." He nodded, regaining his usual expression. But his warm smile, though modest, showed that the gesture had touched him more than he let on. Stop by if you need anything, Kevin added. Just, hopefully, next time without any adventures like that. Lena and Mike laughed, and the farewell became a bit less tense. They left the store, feeling that they had closed another important chapter in this unpleasant story. Months passed, but the events of that fateful night still lingered in Lena and Mike's minds. Although life gradually returned to normal, they both understood that something inside them had changed forever. The carefree days when they could go shopping without thinking about what might be lurking around the corner were gone. Troubling memories continued to surface whenever they found themselves in similar situations. Each time Lena entered a supermarket or walked down the street after dark, she began to act differently. Her gaze was no longer distracted, as it had been before. She scrutinized her surroundings carefully. Her attention was drawn to the slightest details: who was walking behind her, how people behaved in the store, whether someone was lingering suspiciously long in one aisle, and what cars were parked in their area. Routine actions, whether it was buying milk or a simple trip to the pharmacy, now triggered a vigilance that required extra effort and internal focus. Every evening, as she approached her home, Lena noticed little things she had previously overlooked: shadows along the sidewalk, the headlights of a distant car, or the silhouettes of people passing by. She could no longer afford the luxury of being oblivious to her surroundings. It was a new skill acquired that night, an alertness that could no longer be turned off. Mike had changed as well. Once confident and calm, he increasingly immersed himself in thoughts about safety. Their conversations now often revolved around how to better avoid similar situations. They decided to give up late-night shopping, especially alone. Now every outing was planned with the new realities in mind. When Mike parked the car near the supermarket, he always tried to find a spot closer to the entrance, under the streetlights. In the darkness of the streets, he kept an eye out for any suspicious cars or people. Moreover, they began to notice details that had once seemed insignificant. For example, if unfamiliar vehicles appeared in the parking lot near their home, Lena would try to remember their makes and license plates, while Mike increasingly checked for any suspicious items left near their car. Once, they even discussed the possibility of installing a security camera at their house to feel safer. Moments that had now become important, such as calling the police or reacting quickly to a potential threat, had once seemed distant and unnecessary. Now Lena and Mike understood how crucial these actions were. The memories of that night, when they instinctively felt they were being followed and made the right decision to hide, showed them that instincts could sometimes save lives. "You know, Mike," Lena said one evening as they were returning home after dinner, "that night taught me that safety is something you can't forget for a second. We often live thinking that nothing bad will happen to us, that it always happens to someone else. But in reality, everything can change in an instant." "You're right," Mike nodded, cautiously watching the road and glancing in the rearview mirrors as if checking whether someone was following them. "I never thought things could go wrong so quickly. It was just an ordinary trip to the store, but it changed us forever." Their conversation faded, but their thoughts continued to haunt them. Memories of that night made them reflect on how easily one could find themselves in a dangerous situation. Life went on, and they learned to live with newfound knowledge and habits. Their thoughts now held more caution, more attentiveness. Every day served as a reminder that even the most ordinary moments could turn into a trial. Having survived that night, Lena and Mike understood that the world, no matter how calm and predictable it seemed, could harbor dangers for which one needed to be prepared. Their lives could no longer be the same, but now they knew what mattered most: the importance of vigilance, mutual support, and quick responses to threats.